You're listening to the Westminster Canterbury Tales podcast, creating community to foster joy and well-being. Thanks for listening.
Welcome. We're here in our new programming at Westminster Canterbury called Tell Me a Story. And I have with me today Maymie Proctor. And just let me, before we begin, talk a little bit about what this podcast series is going to be. It's about people telling stories. I believe that all people, whatever else we are in life, we're homo narrative. We're human storytellers. And we all have stories. And we live by those stories. Those stories shape our lives. Those stories give us vision for life. And they can tell us things. So we all have a big story of our life, but we have a lot of little stories. And so we're going to be here with Maymie today and just listen to some of the stories she has, because she's been a really big part of Westminster Canterbury since I've been here. And we're just so privileged to have her with us. Can you just tell us a little bit about your life? It doesn't have to be long. Just, where you were born and how you were raised and a little bit about you, just so we get to know you.
Okay. Start with where I was born. I was born in Kenosha, Wisconsin, a few years ago, like 1927. Reared in Racine, Wisconsin, which is another city about 10 miles away. Went to school there, grew up there, was a family reared by a wonderful man, my father. My mother passed away when I was 11 years old, and I was one of 6 siblings. I was the second child, a brother about a year and a half older. And my father reared all of us by himself. And until I went to college, he was truly an outstanding man. I left Racine to go to college at Tuskegee University. It was Tuskegee Institute at that time. Wonderful experience. I'm sure you've heard of many of the names related to Tuskegee, like Booker T. Washington and the wonderful Peanut Man. What was his name?
Jimmy Carter?
No.
George Washington Carver.
You're right.
Washington Carver.
Yeah. But that was a fabulous experience for me. Leaving Wisconsin meant leaving the North and going to the segregated South.
That's right.
And that was a really striking experience. And I think the experience was more in the travel to Tuskegee, because once students got to Tuskegee, they were so well cared for, and cared for in terms of rules and regulations, like not leaving campus, not riding in public transportation, not leaving the campus without a blue slip or a pink slip.
Yeah.
Blue slip you could get from the dorm mother. Pink slip had to come from the dean of women.
Oh, wow.
Well, because blue meant you were just going to go across the street to a little shopping area. Pink meant you were going to go downtown. You had to go with another person for blue. But for pink, you had to go in approved groups of 3. And, we used to just be so angry about all those rules. But when we thought back, it was a means of protection for us.
And it kept you safe.
It did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit, and I know you have more to your story, because I know you met your husband, I think, there, right? A man that eventually became your husband?
I did not meet him there.
Oh, you didn't?
No. He was a Tuskegee Airman,
Okay.
but you're too young to remember Benjamin.
Oh, yeah, I'm
But-
so young. Just remember that.
This was in the 1940s, and he finished pilot training just as World War II was ending.
Okay.
So he did not see,
Action and
no,
any of that in the war.
which was a real blessing.
Yeah.
I graduated from Tuskegee in 1949, and the war had just ended, as I said.
Yeah.
And he was probably finishing flying school.
Now, were there many African American pilots at that time?
Only at Tuskegee,
Only there. Okay.
yeah, not military pilots.
Okay.
And it wasn't until this Tuskegee situation developed and whatnot did they have pilots in the Army. They were called Army Air Force.
Oh, really? Okay.
And now it's separated,
Sure.
Army Air Force.
Yeah.
But I met him when he was in dental school at Howard University in Washington, D.C. And I was working in Washington, D.C.
Okay. Okay.
So
So you went to Tuskegee. You graduated from there.
mm-hmm.
And then how did you find your way to Washington, D.C.?
I worked at home for 2 years.
Okay.
And during that 2 years, I was asked at one time to be one of the chaperones with a group of students that were going to Washington, D.C.
Yeah.
And the group was made up of students who were selected by one student from each school, selected by the children of the school to go. They were crossing guard aides
Okay, sure.
with the AAA.
Yeah.
And this large group of students, and this particular year was the first year that a black child was selected.
Uh-huh.
And so going to Washington at that time, segregated,
Yep.
they needed someone to go with them to stay in a different hotel.
Sure.
So I was asked to do that.
Oh, my.
And the trip was wonderful. I knew many of the, I didn't know a lot of the children because they came from all over the city.
Uh-huh.
But I knew just about all of the chaperones.
Yeah.
There was one other nurse,
Uh-huh.
several physicians, and several Racine police. So that was how I got to Washington.
So you got there from...
And found out that there were a number of students who I knew that had been at Tuskegee.
Okay.
Looked them up, and they showed me a couple wonderful reasons why I needed to move to Washington, which I did.
Okay, so you, after 2 years there back in, was it Wisconsin?
Yeah.
You moved to Washington, and you still hadn't met that young man yet.
Well, after a couple of years, I met him.
Yeah? Mm-hmm. Would you just see him on the street or what?
No, oh, cut it out.
Okay.
One of the nurses that I worked with, her husband was a Tuskegee Airman also.
Okay.
And my to-be husband was living with them.
All right.
And she told me about this wonderful person
Yeah.
that I needed to meet, which I rejected for a long time. Did not like blind dates.
That was very wise.
So they were having a party at their house one evening and asked me to come. So that's where I met him at
He
their
just
party.
happened to be there.
At their party.
Yeah, yeah. All right. So then what happened?
Then we started dating
Okay.
and dated for maybe about a year or so.
Okay. That's fair. That's a good amount of time.
And then we got married in 1940, I want to say 6.
Okay.
Around 1946. No. Please forgive me.
Okay, I will. Maybe the early 50s? No?
Oh, it was in the 40s.
It was in the 40s.
Yeah.
Okay, so late 40s you
God.
got married.
You remember I told you
I won't tell 'em.
old people get away with a lot.
You give away with this. We'll let
Okay,
you.
all
Late
right.
40s is good enough.
All right.
Okay, and he was in dentist school. Were you a nurse by then?
Yeah,
Okay,
Yeah.
and did you do your nurse's training at Tuskegee?
I did.
Okay.
Yeah.
So somehow, though, both of you ended up here in the Tidewater area, living in Norfolk, I believe, right?
Correct.
Okay, how did that come about?
Norfolk was home for my husband.
Oh,
And when he finished school, he wanted to come back to Norfolk to practice.
yeah. All right. So, and then somehow you found your way into teaching
I
at
did.
Hampton University.
I did.
Yeah. So,
Well, I was a stay-at-home mom
okay.
for all the years that our children were growing up, and was offered an opportunity to finish my bachelor's degree in nursing from the level of a diploma nurse,
Okay.
registered nurse, but education to the level of what they call diploma at that time.
Okay. Good.
The bachelor's degree in nursing did not exist until, I would say, the late 40s.
Okay.
So the person who was the dean of Hampton University had been a student at Tuskegee. She knew what the curriculum was and how it had been geared towards preparing students to go into the bachelor's level programs.
Wow.
So she was pushing me, and I finally relented. And it was a wonderful situation because you know how programs get federally funded.
That's right.
This program was federally funding diploma level nurses to pursue the bachelor's degree, all expenses paid.
Wow.
Tuition, books, travel, whatever. So, I mean,
So
that's what got me started.
So you're a working mom going back to school, but you got somebody to pay for it.
Well,
Yeah.
so at that time I wasn't working.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah.
So, okay. So you went to school, but eventually something happened there. You ended up teaching there, I believe.
Well, she hired me. This
Yeah, same dean.
Yeah, she
Okay.
did.
How fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And as I was an employee there on the faculty, I pursued 2 master's degrees.
Oh, my.
I earned, first of all, the master's in counseling.
Yes.
At that time, there was no master's in nursing.
Okay.
But as I was working, she was pushing me all the time. You like this job, right? You're really enjoying this, right? If you want to stay here, you need a master's.
Yep.
So first I did the master's in counseling. later they developed a master's in nursing.
So then you took that.
Right.
Well, that's
And
great.
it was really an easy way. I was right there, didn't have to travel anywhere.
Uh-huh.
And by that time, I think faculty members were getting what they called tuition remission or something
Yeah,
like
yeah,
that.
they still call it that. And yeah.
And if you study within that school, your tuition is...
Oh, that's great. Good for Hampton. Now, shout out to Hampton University there.
Yay, yay. Yeah.
So how long were you at Hampton teaching?
20 years.
20 years. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, that's wonderful. Could you go back just a little bit and tell us the story about the train trip between the north, where you grew up, and then on your way to Tuskegee, the south, and just a little bit of what that was like.
Well, as I said, this was my first trip to the South without my parents.
Right.
I went on the train. The train ride started in Racine. We had to change trains in Chicago.
Okay.
Then we went from Chicago to Evansville, Indiana. And it was at that point where all the passengers had to get off the train. Everybody. And they separated the white travelers from the black travelers.
Right.
Black travelers were then told and made to get into the front of the train,
Yeah.
and whites in the back. And, buses, you had to, it was just the opposite.
Yeah,
Blacks
it
had
was.
to ride in the back.
Right.
But it was that way on the trains because at that time, trains were operated by coal.
Right.
No air,
Yeah.
whatever they do, gas or oil.
Yeah.
And the debris that flew from the coal burning, no air conditioning. They had screens in the windows.
Right.
So all that soot,
Would come in to the train,
To the front of the train.
front of the train.
right.
So, very
you-
clearly.
when I got to Tuskegee, I was not a very clean person.
No. Well, not outside, but
Yeah,
maybe
it was-
inside.
That was demeaning,
Yeah.
very demeaning.
Yeah. And that was kind of a wake-up call for you
It
at that point,
was.
wasn't it? Because you didn't experience that in Wisconsin before.
Did not.
then. Yeah.
Did not.
Yeah. Well, now tell us, your husband was a pilot,
Yeah.
and how long was he a pilot?
Well, not many years. The training probably was about 2 years.
Okay.
And I think maybe he did a little private piloting with someone just for, his own pleasure
Right.
after his discharge from the Army.
Right. Yeah. Very, very interesting. How did you find living in? Because we live in the Westminster Canterbury is in the Tidewater area, and we have all these wonderful cities here: Virginia Beach and Chesapeake and Norfolk and Portsmouth and Hampton and Newport News, and go on and on, all the rest. But how did you find you were living in Norfolk then, right? How was it living?
When we first came here, yeah.
And of course, your husband was used to it, but
Right.
this was a little new to you. So what was it
was.
like living in Norfolk at that time?
Well, even though federal legislation desegregated some things, schools were still segregated.
I didn't know that. And this was in the 50s, I guess. Huh?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So your daughters went to segregated schools.
Well, by the time we had children, my oldest daughter was in a segregated situation.
Okay. Yeah.
She was.
But the
They-
younger daughter.
the-
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I'm trying to remember. It was in the 50s
Okay.
when the schools desegregated. But yeah, my oldest started in a segregated situation.
Yeah. But your youngest got to be in a
She started.
mixed school. Yeah.
Well, no.
No?
It was still.
It was still segregated
Yeah.
with your youngest as well.
Right.
Wow.
And that was in the 60s.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wonder, we'll have to find out when they actually, it's one thing to pass legislation, it's another to enact it,
Yeah.
make it happen.
Well, that's true. But then that's the way Norfolk was, because I do recall when my youngest was ready for kindergarten.
Uh-huh.
At that time, Norfolk did not have kindergarten as a part of the
Yeah.
whole situation.
Yeah.
School started in first grade.
Yeah.
But many people wanted their children to go to some kind of kindergarten
Sure.
when they had children that got to be 5 years old.
Sure.
Well, I recalled my husband and I recalled the situation that my oldest daughter had going through kindergarten.
Mm-hmm.
The school was a good school for what they had,
Right.
but it was not at the level of, sorry to say, the white schools.
Sure.
So we decided that rather than send our daughter to one of the schools that was primarily black,
Right.
we would search something else. And so we called a number of the kindergarten schools that had good reputations.
Sure.
And it was amazing how many responses we got when we told them, what we were interested in. And after the conversation ended, where we had received all the information, we said, we just want you to know that we are an African American family. So, you got hang-ups.
Oh, wow.
You got, we will get back to you. And we got, your daughter would not be happy here. All those kinds of things. But there was one school, I'll never forget it, at Knox Presbyterian Church,
Okay.
that responded with, we look forward to having your daughter.
Wow. And did she go there?
Yes.
Oh, that's wonderful.
And it was.
Good for the Presbyterians.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that was a great.
That was wonderful.
It
Yeah.
was.
Yeah.
Was.
Were there any other events or incidents of that were uncomfortable like that you could recall at that time? Or perhaps even the other way around, just times when those were different times than today, aren't they?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe. Can't think of anything
Yeah. Yeah.
offhand.
Today's still a strange time, though, that we live in.
Mm-hmm.
It's not all perfect yet.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, we so appreciate you. Not only being
Thank
here
you.
and just getting to know you and the richness of the nursing and the education and spiritual commitment and love that you bring to our community. It's been great for me personally getting to know you. And you're you're the first, and so it's been a joy talking to you.
Thank you.
I appreciate you being willing to talk to me and to tell your story.
Okay.
And we look forward to some more at a future event sometime.
All right.
So, anything else you want to say to us?
I think I've said enough. I've talked more than I've talked in a long time.
Well, you did.
I didn't know whether my voice was going to hold up.
It did great. It did great. And so, we thank you for being the first Tell Me a Story, and we'll sign off.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Westminster Canterbury Tales podcast. Thank you for listening.